My name is Amelia Harding. I'm 34 years old. And today, I sat in the back row of my brother's seal pinning ceremony, like a stranger crashing someone else's celebration. The courtyard of the Naval Academy buzzed with pride. Flags waving, families cheering, brass instruments blaring in triumph. Sunlight bounced off polished metals and fresh uniforms. Everywhere I looked, there was pride, belonging, legacy, everywhere but where I sat. Ethan stood at the center of it all, soaking in the applause. Our golden boy, the family's future, the one who followed in Dad's footsteps and never got lost. I didn't belong in their spotlight. I wasn't even part of the frame. Mom and Dad sat near the front, surrounded by smiling relatives. They looked like they'd been preparing for this moment their whole lives. They didn't save me a seat, didn't turn around, didn't even ask if I'd come. But I did. Have you ever shown up for family only to feel like you never existed to them? If that's you, this story is yours too. Tell me in the comments, you're not alone. I clapped once softly when Ethan's name was called. Ensign Ethan Harding, SEAL qualification. The crowd rose like a wave. My hands dropped back into my lap. A familiar voice cut through the noise. "Oh, Amelia, I didn't know you'd be here. How's the insurance thing going?" Brittany, a professional in polite cruelty. I smiled tightly. Still saving lives, just not in the way anyone cares about. She blinked, confused. I didn't elaborate. What would be the point? They all thought I failed, that I quit the military to push paper, that I couldn't handle the pressure. But none of them knew what pressure meant. None of them had stared down the barrel of a gun in a place no map dared to name. None of them had lied for their country with blood on their sleeves. While my family drank champagne at Ethan's engagement party, I was knee-deep in an extraction mission. While they rolled their eyes at my absences, I was across the world, negotiating with men who didn't blink at torture. And still, they see me as the weak one. Mom turned, finally, scanning the crowd. Her gaze landed on me for half a second. No smile, no nod, no warmth, just a blank look, like she didn't recognize me. Then her attention snapped back to Ethan, her face lighting up like he was the only person she'd ever loved. I swallowed the lump in my throat and smiled, just enough to survive the moment. They didn't know who I was, and they didn't care to. But as Ethan saluted the crowd, and my mother wiped a proud tear from her cheek, one thought burned through me. What would they say if they knew what my office job really looks like? Before I ever stood behind a locked briefing door or stitched a wound in the dark, I was just a girl playing in the backyard, watching my father give the world to my little brother. We grew up in a neat 2-story house on Primrose Lane. American flag on the porch, hydrangeas by the walkway, and a line down the middle of our lives we never spoke about. Ethan's side was made of action figures, dirt-streaked sneakers, and all the stories of bravery Dad could pour into him. Mine was pink. Dolls I didn't ask for, sparkly notebooks I never wrote in, dresses I hated. I used to sneak over to Ethan's side. I'd line up his toy soldiers by unit type, assign them missions. One day I built an ambush so clever it actually impressed him. He was 7, I was 9. "Dad," Ethan shouted, "Millie made a whole battle plan." Dad walked out, looked over the setup, and chuckled. "That's cute," he said. "Now let your sister get back to her books." Cute. Like it was a trick, a fluke. That was the first time I realized I wasn't supposed to win in his world. Only belong politely on the sidelines. It got worse as we got older. I remember one 4th of July weekend. Hot dogs, sparklers, all the usual noise. Dad pulled Ethan aside to teach him how to tie different knots, how to identify ranks on a passing uniform. I hovered close, listening, soaking it in. "You want to learn too, Amelia?" he asked, glancing at me. My chest lit up. "Yes." He smiled almost kindly. "That's good. Maybe one day you'll marry a soldier." It landed like a slap. The worst part was, he didn't mean it to hurt. That was just how he saw me. Smart, sure, obedient, good at staying out of the way. Ethan, on the other hand, could spill orange soda on the carpet and still get a pat on the head. Boys will be boys. One summer, we went fishing. Ethan cast the first line. Dad stood beside him, giving quiet pointers, nodding like he was training the next Admiral. I sat a few feet away, mostly ignored. I caught the biggest fish that day, a full 6 pounds, alone. Dad barely looked at it. "Huh," he muttered. "You got lucky. No praise, no photo, just luck." I wish I could say I forgot those words, but they stayed with me. They curled around my spine, hardened my heart, made me push farther than I should have, just to prove I wasn't a fluke. Mom didn't help. I once overheard her say, "Ethan's a born leader, Amelia's more responsible. She'll have a stable life." Stable. That was the dream they had for me. Steady, safe, silent. But I didn't want a stable life. I wanted a life that mattered. And if they weren't going to give it to me, I'd build it myself. By the time I hit high school, I had already learned how to disappear with grace. Ethan, he walked into every room like he belonged at the center, and everyone agreed. Coaches, teachers, relatives, they all saw him as a natural-born leader. "He's got presence," Dad used to say. "He just fits in uniform." I got straight A's, won the regional math Olympiad, and led the debate team to state finals. "You're so disciplined," Mom would smile, just like a good secretary. Secretary, not strategist, not leader, not anything close to what they said about Ethan after he managed to organize a fundraiser that raised a few $100s. You'd think he negotiated a peace treaty. At dinner, the spotlight belonged to him. "Ethan, how was drills today?" "Ethan," Coach called, "you're up for squad captain." "Ethan, your ROTC uniform looks so sharp at that parade." Then, as an afterthought, "Oh, Amelia, how'd your test go?" I'd already gotten the results, highest in class. "Perfect score," I'd say quietly. "Of course you did," Dad would mumble, already refilling his coffee. It wasn't cruelty, that's what made it worse. It was casual neglect, polished, polite invisibility. One afternoon, I came home clutching an envelope, my acceptance into the Summer National Leadership Summit. It was competitive, prestigious, life-changing. I handed it to Dad. He read it slowly, then raised an eyebrow. "Huh, sounds serious, but don't overdo it. No need to stress yourself." That night, they threw a family BBQ because Ethan won Best Physical Readiness in cadet training. No one mentioned my letter again. I started keeping trophies in drawers. Awards went under my bed. I stopped correcting people when they called Ethan the smart one, just because he could name aircraft types. I stopped raising my hand at family dinners. They weren't listening anyway. It wasn't that I wanted to outshine him. I just wanted to matter, on my own terms. One rainy afternoon, I sat on the porch steps, still in my school blazer, listening to Ethan talk about his mock combat drill, while Dad nodded in pride. When I chimed in to say my team had just won regionals, Dad didn't even turn his head. "Good job, sweetheart," he said to the air, and that's when it hit me. They didn't mean to ignore me. They just believed Ethan's world had more weight. His future was painted in medals and flags. Mine, in soft colors and steady paychecks. They wanted me to be safe, practical, predictable. But I wanted fire. I wanted sharpness. I wanted a life that couldn't be boxed into their quiet little plans. And if I had to keep every victory to myself just to survive in that house, then so be it. I'd build my legacy in silence, and one day they'd choke on their surprise. When the offer came, I didn't ask questions. It wasn't delivered in a grand speech or wrapped in ceremony. It came as a manila folder slipped across a desk in a quiet, windowless room, with a single line. "You've been noticed." I sat across from a commander I'd never seen before. No name tag, no formal rank, just a cold, steady gaze and fingers calloused, like he'd never spent a day at a desk. "We don't recruit often," he said. "Only those who can disappear." My heart raced. This was it, the real work. The one path where I wouldn't be someone's afterthought, where silence wasn't weakness, it was the uniform. I said yes without blinking. Leaving the academy meant leaving the parade, the promotions, the visible track my family glorified. On paper, I had dropped out. In reality, I stepped into a deeper game, one I couldn't tell a soul about. I called home that night. Mom picked up. "Hi, Mom, I need to tell you something." She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask what happened. Just silence then. "You're quitting?" "Not exactly," I said. "It's a classified role. I can't talk about it, but—" "Amelia," she cut in, "this is exactly what we feared. You've always had trouble finishing things." My throat tightened. "I'm not quitting, it's more demanding. I just can't say more." She sighed. "Well, I suppose someone has to play it safe. Your brother just got selected for advanced SEAL training." Of course he did. Dad didn't call back. I received a text 2 days later. "Hope this decision makes you happy. We're proud of Ethan." And that was that. I didn't correct them, didn't clarify. I let the story write itself. Amelia gave up. Amelia's working admin somewhere. Amelia couldn't keep up. Meanwhile, I was in tactical immersion training for 16 hours a day, learning how to breathe in gas chambers, hack surveillance feeds, lie under pressure, run recon in pitch black, with live rounds flying inches from my head. My first mission came 6 months later, hostage retrieval in an embassy that didn't officially exist. I walked out with 2 survivors and a scar under my ribs. That night, I opened the family group chat. Dozens of photos from Ethan's promotion dinner. Everyone beaming, champagne, matching shirts. No one had noticed I'd been off-grid for weeks. No one asked why. I received the Silver Star 2 months after that. Unannounced, classified, no crowd, no cameras. Just a firm handshake and a man whispering, "You kept 3 people alive. That's more than most will ever do." I went home alone. That same week, Brittany tagged me in a meme about quitting corporate life to find myself. I didn't even untag it. Because what's the point of defending your name to people who never bothered to learn it? There wasn't one big fight, no dramatic moment, just a slow unraveling, like thread slipping quietly from a sweater no one was wearing anymore. It started with the way they stopped asking real questions. At family dinners, conversations orbited around Ethan, his new assignments, his commanding officer's praise, his girlfriend who fit right in. I was asked about traffic, about the weather, about how calm my life must be. At first, I tried. I'd smile and offer something vague about work travel, long hours, project deadlines. But their eyes glazed over before I finished my first sentence. So I stopped offering. Thanksgiving 2 years ago. I remember it vividly. Ethan had just returned from a short deployment. He walked in wearing his uniform, and Mom practically cried. Dad clapped him on the back, already pouring him a drink. When I arrived 10 minutes early, no one noticed. Later, while Ethan recounted a mission in some training zone, I sat quietly, picking at the edge of the napkin in my lap. Brittany leaned in. "You look tired," she said. "Not that your job is dangerous or anything, right?" I laughed, small and tight. Right, not dangerous at all. No one noticed the way my hand shook slightly as I raised my glass. That night, after dessert, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The porch was cold. My breath fogged the air, but the silence was warmer than the noise inside. I stared at the night sky and wondered if I disappeared tomorrow, who in there would even know where to look? I didn't feel angry anymore, just numb. The kind of numb that comes after years of bruises no one believed you had. I began to make myself scarce, slowly, methodically. I skipped Easter with the excuse of work, left Christmas dinner early, claiming a migraine. I didn't show up for Ethan's birthday. No one asked why. It was easier this way, cleaner. I answered texts with emojis, reacted to family photos with a thumbs up, called home less. I watched them forget how to reach me, and maybe deep down I let them. Because being present while invisible hurt more than absence ever could. At some point, I realized I wasn't retreating out of spite. I was protecting what was left of me, the strong, unbreakable parts I'd need for the life I was building. Far away from their expectations, and still on quiet nights I sometimes caught myself checking my phone, hoping for something more than silence, a message that said, "We miss you, we were wrong." It never came, and so I kept walking, not out of bitterness, but because staying had started to feel like disappearing anyway. There's a strange kind of silence that comes with vanishing. Not dramatic, not loud, just quiet. The kind that wraps around your life so slowly, you don't notice until it's the only sound left. After I joined the unit, everything familiar dissolved. No address, no birthday cakes, no weekends. Just coded messages, black flights, safe house walls that smelled like bleach and borrowed time. My name changed every few weeks. My appearance subtly altered. Haircuts, glasses, accents. Sometimes I'd catch myself in a mirror and flinch. Not because I looked different, but because I couldn't remember what normal Amelia looked like anymore. I lived out of a duffel bag, woke up at odd hours in rooms that weren't mine, surrounded by equipment I couldn't be seen with. Some days I was an analyst, other days a translator. And once I pretended to be a journalist just long enough to photograph a war criminal stepping out of a church. The world I lived in didn't care about birthdays or mothers or medals. It cared about leverage. I ate alone, worked alone, recovered alone. Even among teammates, we spoke in codes, half-truths, and muscle memory. You trusted people to cover your six, not to know who you were. That kind of solitude seeps into your bones. One night, I came back from a surveillance op just before sunrise. The mission had gone sideways, no one hurt, but we lost the target. My hands were still shaking. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at a vending machine sandwich I couldn't bring myself to eat. My personal phone had one notification, a group photo of my family, smiling over a brunch table. The caption read, "All together again." Except I wasn't there. I hadn't been there for years, and no one noticed. They didn't know I was halfway across the world, that I hadn't slept in 40 hours, that I'd spent the night watching a man beat his wife and couldn't intervene because intel came first. To them, I was just busy, distant, disconnected. And in some ways, they were right. I'd built this distance, out of duty, out of survival. But now I wasn't sure how to close it, even if I wanted to. Sometimes I caught myself imagining what it would be like to quit, to go back to being a nobody with a condo, a cat, and a name people actually used. But I didn't, because even if it was thankless, even if it broke me, I believed in the work. And I knew this truth. I'd rather be invisible saving lives than visible living a lie. The operation was supposed to be clean. In and out, secure the hostage, vanish into the night, zero noise. But there's no such thing as a clean mission when emotions bleed through Kevlar and steel nerves crack in silence. The girl we rescued couldn't have been more than 14. Her wrists were raw, her ankles bruised, her eyes wide and shattered. I wrapped her in my jacket as she trembled in the back of the van. She never spoke, not once. She reminded me of someone I used to be, someone I'd buried under 5 aliases and a locked file no one would ever read. We got her out. We survived. Technically, it was a success, but I couldn't feel it. Back at the safe house, I stripped off my vest, still damp with sweat and someone else's blood. My shoulder throbbed from where I hit the wall mid-exit. I didn't care. I made it to the bathroom before everything caved in. I slid down the wall, sat on the cold tile, and stared at nothing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I counted my breaths the way they taught us, but nothing worked. My vision blurred. My pulse thundered in my ears. And then my phone buzzed, not the secure one, the personal one. A message from Mom. "You missed Ethan's pinning ceremony. Again, it's not like you're saving the world." I laughed, a sound so hollow it echoed in the sink. Then came the crash. It wasn't loud, no slamming, no screaming, just surrender. My whole body folded in. I curled into myself like a wire finally snapped from being pulled too tight for too long. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to be. Knuckles tapped the door. I said nothing. It opened anyway, slow, respectful. Colonel Wallace, my superior officer, never one for softness, always punctual, always by the book. He looked at me, sitting on the floor, broken open in a way I didn't know I was capable of. He said nothing, just stepped in and sat beside me, his back against the wall, our shoulders almost touching. He placed a mug next to me, coffee, no words, no demand, just presence. After a while he spoke, quiet but steady. "We don't all bounce back right away. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've been carrying more than anyone sees." My throat tightened. I didn't cry, not yet, but I heard him. And in that silence, in that stillness, I finally realized someone saw me. Not as a uniform, not as a shadow, just me. And maybe, for the first time in years, that was enough. We never called it family. That word had too many sharp edges for me, too many ghosts attached to holiday dinners and silences at crowded tables. But what grew between us in that dimly lit world of shadows and silence, it was something close, maybe even closer. It started quietly. After the night I fell apart, Colonel Wallace didn't change overnight, but he noticed things, like when I skipped dinner or stayed too long at the range. He never asked what was wrong, just handed me a protein bar and walked away. That was his way of saying, "I see you." Then came Jordan. He joined our unit 6 months after me. He was messy, loud when he could afford to be, and brilliant in the field. He cracked jokes during debriefings, hummed old Motown in elevators, and somehow made the weight of our work feel a little less suffocating. The first time he saw me freeze up, during a post-mission cleanup, my hands hovering over a blood-stained file, he didn't say a word. Just took the file, finished the job, and tossed me a warm water bottle. Later, over instant noodles and canned peaches, he said, You know, you're allowed to break down sometimes. We all do. Even Wallace once threw a chair at a wall. Don't let the stoic act fool you. I didn't respond, but I listened. Week after week, I found myself sitting near him more often. It wasn't just him, it was all of them, our unit. The quiet nods, the way they passed extra gloves without being asked. The way no one ever pushed for backstories but always noticed when you were off. We didn't need words like love or family. We had something better, presence. And in that presence, I felt something unfamiliar growing, trust. One Friday night, after a training op went sideways and left us bruised and exhausted, Jordan tossed me a patched cloth. It was black, with a silver emblem, a wolf and a dagger. Not official, he said, but you're one of us now. Figured you should have something to prove it. I held it in my hand for a long moment, something heavy catching in my throat. No ceremony, no applause. Just a quiet act that said, you belong here. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn my seat at the table. It was already set for me, not because of blood, not because I followed someone else's path, but because I showed up, again and again. And they saw me for exactly who I was, and didn't flinch. That, I realized, was what family should have always meant. There are medals you frame for others to see, and there are medals you hide, not because you're ashamed, but because they were never meant to prove anything to anyone but yourself. That night, I sat alone in a safe house in northern Germany, hours after a successful interception. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. The room smelled faintly of dust and old leather, the kind of sterile stillness that forces you to face things you've buried. I reached into the bottom drawer of my travel case and pulled out a small metal box, unmarked, battered, and secured with a flimsy lock. Inside were the only pieces of my real story. A folded letter of commendation from a general I'd never meet again. A thumb drive with encrypted debriefs. And at the bottom, my silver star. I hadn't looked at it in months. The last time I did, I was sitting on the floor of a rented apartment in Eastern Europe, wondering if I'd ever feel like I was more than just a ghost in my own life. I turned the medal over in my palm. My name, my rank, my silence. It was heavy, not in grams, but in meaning. My family didn't know about it. They still thought I worked in admin, that I filed reports and booked flights, that I had given up on the path they respected. For years, that lie had bruised me. I used to crave their recognition so badly, it made me sick. I rehearsed imaginary conversations where my father finally said, "I'm proud of you," where my mother looked at me like I was someone worth inviting to the front row. But those moments never came, and that night, staring at the truth in my hand, I realized they didn't need to. Because I knew who I was, I had walked into rooms no one else dared to enter. I had made impossible choices. I had saved people who would never know my name, and lived with the consequences alone. That was courage, that was worth, and it had never depended on applause. I didn't need a photo album or a family toast. I didn't need Ethan's spotlight or my parents' approval to validate my sacrifices. The only approval I'd ever truly needed was my own. So I placed the medal, not back in the box, but on the desk in front of me. Visible, unapologetic, mine. And for the first time in years, I whispered the words out loud. Not to convince anyone, but to affirm what had already been earned. I am enough, and I've always been. The envelope came on a Tuesday. Thick cardstock, gold trim, my name spelled perfectly on the front. Amelia Harding in elegant cursive, like it belonged to someone they actually knew. I held it for a full minute before opening it. Inside, You are cordially invited to the promotion ceremony of Lieutenant Commander Ethan Harding. Of course, he made Commander. I stared at the date. Next Saturday, just over a week away. It felt less like an invitation and more like a test. I hadn't seen them in nearly a year. I'd skipped Christmas, ignored Brittany's birthday messages, ghosted 2 family group calls. No one followed up. But this, they sent by mail, heavy paper, gold foil. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I placed it on the kitchen counter and walked away like it wasn't humming in my chest. The next morning, my phone buzzed. Mom. I stared at the screen for 5 full rings before picking up. Her voice was chipper, forced. Hi, sweetheart. Did you get the invitation? Yes, I said. A pause, just long enough to hide something behind. I really hope you'll come this time, she added. It's important, for Ethan. Silence. Then she sighed. Look, I know you're busy with whatever it is you do, but surely you can take one weekend. It would mean a lot to your brother. And to us. That part stung. The way she lumped me in as an afterthought, an optional presence, a stray thread they could tidy up for the sake of appearance. I bit the inside of my cheek. Before I could answer, she added, You haven't been to anything in years. Don't you think it's time? Time? Time for what? For me to sit in the back again while they fawn over Ethan? For more shallow questions and forced smiles from people who still believed I ran spreadsheets and organized filing systems? Still, I said nothing. She shifted tones the way she always did when unsure if she should guilt me or flatter me. You know, Ethan never says it, but I think he'd really like you there. A pause. Also, it might be nice for you to be part of something again. That did it. Not the words, the implication. That I had removed myself. That my absence was my fault, not the result of 1,000 cuts they never bothered to see. I ended the call with a polite lie. I'll think about it. But the second I hung up, I knew one thing for sure. I was going, not for them, not even for Ethan, for me. To stand in the room they tried to erase me from, and decide for myself who I was going to be in it. I didn't sleep that night, not from nerves, not from fear, but from something sharper, resolve. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter like a quiet dare, gold foil glinting under the lamp, spelling out the name they hadn't said out loud in years. Amelia Harding. I kept hearing my mother's voice, circling in my mind. It might be nice for you to be part of something again. As if I'd just drifted away. As if I hadn't been edged out, ignored, reduced to the ghost that showed up late and left early. But this time I wouldn't show up small. I wouldn't show up at all, unless it was on my own terms. So I started preparing. Not for them, for me. I pulled out a notebook and wrote in bold at the top of the page, I don't owe them comfort. Then I listed every predictable thing that would happen. Brittany's smile, too wide, too fake. Dad's lingering silence, laced with quiet doubt. Mom's gentle digs. So, you're still doing that government work? Ethan's indifference, or worse, his awkward pride, trying to include me while still keeping me in a corner. I imagined the room. Polished shoes, stiff suits, staged photos, laughter I wouldn't be part of. And I asked myself the one question that mattered. Can I walk in as myself and stay standing? The answer came slower than I wanted, but it came, yes. Because I wasn't the same woman who used to shrink under their stares. I wasn't the version of me who needed to be defended or explained. I had survived too much to still be seeking a seat at their table. So I went shopping. Not for validation, for armor. A navy blue suit, structured, clean, sharp as my silence. I wore a watch I'd received after my third operation, etched with a date only I remembered. I skipped jewelry. Let my presence speak louder than accessories. I looked in the mirror and saw someone they didn't know, and never really tried to. And for once, that didn't sting. It steadied me. On the morning of the ceremony, I tucked the invitation in my jacket, not because I needed to be let in, but because it reminded me they didn't invite me. They invited their idea of me. What they were going to get was the real thing. Before I left, I paused at the door, one breath in, one breath out. And then I whispered, "I'm not here for their applause. I'm here to take up space." Then I stepped outside, not as a daughter, but as a force. I arrived 10 minutes early, not to be polite, to watch. The base auditorium was dressed like something out of a recruitment video. Navy banners hanging proud, rows of perfectly shined shoes, polished insignias catching the light. The scent of starch, leather, and anticipation hovered thick in the air. Laughter echoed off high ceilings. Flashbulbs clicked. People adjusted ties and pride. I stood just inside the doorway, scanning the room like it was a mission briefing. There they were, front row. My mother in ivory, pearls at her throat, dabbing the corner of her eye, even before anything emotional had happened. My father in full uniform, chest out, eyes hard with pride. Ethan stood off to the side, commanding in his dress whites, flanked by admirers. He looked older, sharper, more polished, and still like a stranger. No one turned to see who had entered. Of course not. Even the event coordinator looked confused when I handed her my invitation. "Your family?" she asked. I nodded, offered a faint smile. "So they tell me." She gestured vaguely to the open seats near the back. I took one, by choice. I didn't need to sit near people who hadn't saved me a place in years. The ceremony began, predictably, speeches laced with clichés, jokes that earned polite laughs, medals, introductions, applause. Pride thick in the air like humidity. Then the announcer cleared his throat. "Lieutenant Commander Ethan Harding." The room exploded. They rose for him. A standing ovation. I stayed seated. From my angle, I could see the whole family glowing. My mother clutched my father's arm. Brittany raised her phone high, recording the moment with shaking hands. Ethan walked across the stage with precision, humility, and ease. Then, his eyes scanned the room. For half a second, I thought they landed on me. But if they did, he looked away quickly. No nod, no flicker of acknowledgement. Just like always. And then, inevitably, Brittany. She turned, a smile already plastered on her lips. "Oh," she said, blinking like I was a ghost. "Amelia, I didn't know you'd be here." Not cruel, but not kind, just surprised. Then her eyes drifted downward, taking in my suit, my posture. Still doing the insurance thing. There it was, that final dig. Polished and casual. I looked at her, held her gaze, and smiled. Before I could answer, the applause erupted again. Ethan saluted. The crowd cheered. Everyone rose once more, hands clapping, camera flashes dancing, everyone but me. Because I had stood alone for a long time, and I wasn't going to stand now for people who had never stood for me. The applause hadn't even died down when the shift began. Rear Admiral Montgomery stood from the VIP section near the front. Impeccable posture, crisp medals across his chest, presence like gravity. The crowd parted instinctively. Officers recognize rank the way animals sense storms. He didn't look at Ethan, he looked at me, and then he walked. Calm, direct. I felt the air change, heads turned. The polite buzz of ceremony slowed, then quieted. A few whispered, some followed his line of sight. My mother's smile faltered. He stopped 2 feet from my row and said, loud enough to carry over the hush, "Colonel Harding, I wasn't expecting you today." Silence, a silence that cracked and echoed. My father shifted in his seat. My mother's fingers went rigid on her clutch. Brittany lowered her phone, blinking. Ethan turned fully toward me, confusion drawing hard lines across his face. "Colonel," he repeated, like the word didn't belong in his mouth. Montgomery turned to face the front of the room. His voice, when it came, was steady and sure. "Colonel Amelia Harding has served with distinction in our most sensitive theaters. Multiple commendations, Silver Star, intelligence assignments I can't even summarize here." A collective breath sucked in. My name rang in the space like a grenade no one saw coming. Someone in uniform actually saluted me from 3 rows up. I nodded back instinctively. Montgomery's tone softened. It's not often we get the chance to acknowledge those who serve in silence. He looked toward my parents. "You must be proud." The sentence landed like a blade. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother blinked, lips trembling. I stood, slowly. All eyes on me. I didn't shake. I didn't smile. I simply said, clearly, "Thank you, Admiral. Today I'm here as family." He nodded. "And it's an honor to have you here." Then he walked away. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was full of recalculations, regret, realization. Ethan stepped toward me, voice lower than I'd ever heard it. You're actually..." "Yes," I said. He swallowed. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I met his eyes, held them. "I wasn't allowed to." Then quieter. "Even if I had, would you have listened?" He didn't answer. No one did. So I turned back to my seat, calm, composed, and as I sat down, I said one thing, not for them, but for me. You don't have to understand it. You just have to live with it now. And I let the weight of truth settle across the room like ash after fire. The applause had long faded, but the silence still rang. People trickled out of the auditorium, glancing back at me like I was something fragile or radioactive. Either way, untouchable. Some nodded politely. A few looked curious. Most avoided eye contact altogether. That was fine. I wasn't here for them. I stayed seated until the room had mostly cleared, my back straight, my hands calm. But inside, adrenaline still pulsed in my fingertips like aftershocks following an earthquake. Then I saw them coming, my parents, slow, hesitant, out of sync for once. My mother clutched her purse like it might anchor her to something. My father walked beside her, stiff, silent, the way he always got when control slipped through his hands. They stopped a few feet from me. "Amelia," my mother said, voice carefully measured. "Could we talk?" I stood, not out of obligation, out of readiness. She looked at me like she was trying to place a new version of an old photo. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I looked her in the eye. "I did. Just not in words you were willing to hear." She winced, just slightly. My father cleared his throat. "We were surprised. That man, Montgomery, he spoke like you've been doing this for years." "I have," I said simply. "You've been in intelligence?" he asked. "This whole time?" I nodded. He blinked. "And no one knew?" I shrugged. "That's kind of the point." He looked down, then off to the side. Not angry, not even defensive, just untethered. Mom softened. "We thought you left the academy because you didn't know what you wanted." "I left because I was recruited into something bigger," I said. "And I didn't correct your assumptions because correcting them wouldn't have changed anything." There it was. Her face twisted, not from anger, but from something closer to shame. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Ethan appeared behind them, his uniform now feeling too big for his posture. He looked at me like he was seeing an entirely different person. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, genuinely confused. I paused, because I didn't think you'd listen, and maybe because I was tired of trying. He nodded slowly. "I get that, now." "Do you?" I wondered. But I didn't say it. We stood there in the quiet wreckage of everything unsaid. Then I exhaled, not bitter, not triumphant, just clear. "I didn't come here for apologies," I said. "I came because I stopped needing them." They didn't respond. And that was okay, because sometimes silence is the most honest thing people can offer. They asked me to dinner, not with guilt, not with grand gestures, just a quiet suggestion offered in the parking lot as families spilled into cars and congratulations drifted away on the evening wind. "We're all here," Mom said softly. "Maybe we could sit down, talk, just the four of us." I hesitated, for a heartbeat too long. Then I said yes, not because I wanted reconciliation, because I wanted closure, on my terms. We ended up at a restaurant not far from base, white tablecloths, flickering candles, silverware that clinked too loudly in the silence between us. Ethan broke it first. "You looked different up there today," he said, "like you didn't need any of us." I took a sip of water. Maybe because for a long time I didn't. No one corrected me. Dad cleared his throat. "That Admiral, Montgomery, he spoke like you were one of the best." I didn't respond, because I was, and they didn't get to validate that now. Mom leaned forward. "I just wish we'd known." "So do I said, "but you didn't ask." Her face fell slightly. "That's not fair. We didn't know we should have." "That's the point," I replied, calm, even. "You didn't think I was worth asking." Silence. Long, heavy. Ethan looked down, then up. "I used to think you resented me." "I didn't," I said. "I resented being invisible. That's different." He nodded. "I see that now." Dad exhaled. "So what happens now?" I looked at them, all of them, and I told the truth. "We don't go back. We don't pretend this never happened. I'm not starting over." I paused. "But I'm willing to move forward, with conditions." Mom straightened. "What kind of conditions?" "Honesty," I said. "No more assumptions, no more performative questions, just to keep up appearances. If you want me around, you need to want the real version of me, not the quiet one you were comfortable with." They looked at each other, then back at me. "We can try," Dad said. "That's all I need," I replied. "Not perfection, just effort." Mom reached for my hand across the table. This time I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. I let the moment be what it was, fragile, overdue, and maybe enough. "You were never broken, Amelia," Mom said quietly. I met her eyes, steady. "I know," I said. "The question is, do you know that now?" And she nodded. For once, I believed her. Freedom didn't arrive like a crashing wave. It came slowly, like morning light easing through half-closed blinds. No trumpets, no ceremony, just quiet. After the ceremony, I returned to Berlin. Same safe house apartment, same chipped tile floor, same windows that overlooked the same tired street. But something inside me was different. This time I unpacked, not just clothes, but presents. I took my uniforms out of the suitcase, hung them in the closet properly. I laid my toiletries in the drawer like I'd be staying longer than a week. I placed a photo on the nightstand, my unit, all of us dusty, bruised, laughing after a mission. Not smiling for the world, smiling for each other. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I bought a plant, a real one. Not fake, not easily replaced. Something that would need watering, attention, presence. That evening, I called my mother back. It rang twice. She picked up fast, almost too fast. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I replied. Neither of us rushed. She didn't ask about Ethan, didn't press about work. She asked how I was sleeping, if Berlin was cold. If the bakery on the corner still made that walnut rye I liked. I told her yes, that I'd picked up a loaf that morning. We talked for 12 minutes. It was the best conversation we'd had in years. The next day, I woke up and didn't reach for my work tablet first. I opened the curtains instead. Let the sun touch my face. Then I went for a walk. Not to scope a target, not to check for tails, just to move, to exist. There's a bakery 2 blocks down that sells warm bread before 7 a.m. The owner doesn't know my name. He calls me Fräulein M. and always adds an extra roll if I tip with coins. It feels nice, uncomplicated. And that week I started painting again. Not for anyone. Not to get better, not to fill the space, just to watch color move. Some nights I'd sit cross-legged on the floor, music low, brush in hand, and forget for a moment that I was trained to kill. I'd remember instead that I could create. I looked in the mirror one morning and didn't brace for judgment, didn't rehearse answers for questions no one asked, didn't edit myself. I just looked, and I liked who looked back. Not because she was perfect, not because she'd healed completely, but because she was finally mine. No mission, no mask, no pretending, just me, breathing, living, free. Her name was Dr. Keller. She didn't wear a white coat. She didn't take notes while I talked. She sat with her legs crossed, palms resting on the arms of her chair, and met my eyes without flinching. I didn't tell her about my operations, about the countries I'd disappeared into, or the lies I'd worn like second skin. I told her I couldn't sleep with the lights off, that sometimes even silence sounded too loud, that I didn't know how to relax around people who said they loved me. She didn't judge, she just asked, "When was the first time you felt invisible?" The answer surprised me. Not a mission, not a boyfriend, not a betrayal. It was the 3rd grade. I'd made a diorama for school, tiny soldiers in cardboard trenches, each one hand-painted. I was proud. I showed it to my dad, hoping for a smile. He glanced at it and said, "Maybe next time, try something more girly." That night, I threw the whole thing in the trash. Dr. Keller said, "You didn't stop creating. You just stopped letting people see it." I stared at her for a long time. She was right. Over the next few sessions, we didn't talk about the military. We talked about my mother's compliments that always came with qualifiers, about birthday cards signed late, about being told I was strong only when I was silent. We talked about what it meant to survive a war at home long before I ever stepped into one overseas. I started writing letters, one for each version of myself that had been abandoned. To the girl who got overlooked at the school assembly. To the cadet who had no one in the stands. To the woman who received a silver star in silence. Each letter started the same. "I see you now." And they ended the same way too. "I'm sorry I believed them instead of you." Some days I cried while writing. Other days I didn't feel anything at all. But slowly, something loosened. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was recognition. Naming the wound so it couldn't control me anymore. Toward the end of our 8th session, Dr. Keller asked, "What would you say to them now if they actually listened?" I didn't hesitate. "Nothing," I said, because I finally listened to myself. And that, I realized, was what healing looked like. Not fixing, not forgetting, but finally becoming the person I'd needed to be for me. It was just a Tuesday. Nothing grand, no celebration, no mission. but something about it felt different. Maybe because, for once, I didn't feel like I had to rehearse who I was before walking into a room. Jordan had messaged earlier. "We're cooking, you better not ghost. Wallace is trying to make pasta." I laughed when I read it. I hadn't laughed out loud at a message in years. I almost said no, not because I didn't want to go, but because letting people in, even the ones who already saw me, still felt dangerous sometimes. But I went. Their apartment smelled like garlic, onion, and burnt pride. Wallace was at the stove, scowling at a pot. 2 others from the unit were yelling over a card game. Someone had spilled wine, and no one bothered cleaning it yet. Jordan opened the door with a smug grin. "You made it," he said. "And you're only 15 minutes late. Personal best." I gave him a look. That's called fashionably cautious. We ate on mismatched plates. Someone brought cake, but forgot forks, so we used spoons. At some point, music came on, bad 90s hits, the kind that make you nostalgic for a past that wasn't even yours. No one brought up intelligence reports. No one asked me where I'd been or how I felt. They just let me exist. At one point, Jordan handed me a patch. Black fabric, white thread. A wolf curled around a compass, sharp and purposeful. I turned it over in my palm. "What's this?" He shrugged. "Your place, you're one of us, officially now." I stared at it for a long time, not because I needed it, but because no one had ever offered me something like this without expecting me to earn it twice over. "I didn't think I needed this," I said quietly. "You didn't," Wallace chimed in from the kitchen, "but we still wanted you to have it." And that difference, that small, subtle difference, hit me like a tide. I wasn't being tolerated. I wasn't being compared. I was being chosen because of who I was. Later that night, we sat on the balcony. The city blinked below us. Someone passed around mugs of tea. Wallace lit a cigarette and didn't offer it to anyone else. We sat there in silence, not because we had nothing to say, but because we didn't need to say everything to feel understood. Jordan nudged me with his shoulder. "You good?" I took a breath. Deep, real, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I meant it when I said, "Yeah, I really am." It started with a message from Ethan. "Mom's birthday this Saturday, small dinner, just family, would be good to have you there." No pressure, no guilt trip, just an invitation I hadn't received in a very long time. I stared at it for a while, not in hesitation, but in acknowledgement. I wasn't the same woman who used to flinch at every olive branch they offered. This time, I could choose to walk into that space without losing myself. I typed back, "Okay, I'll be there." The restaurant was familiar. Dim lights, framed photos of Navy Award recipients, booths that had absorbed decades of quiet family drama. The kind of place where everything looked polished on the outside, even if it creaked underneath. I arrived 10 minutes late, intentionally. I needed to know they'd start without me, and they had. They looked up when I entered. Mom, Dad, Ethan, and Brittany. 4 expressions at once: surprise, restraint, curiosity, and something that almost resembled respect. "Amelia," Mom said, rising from her seat. I nodded. "Hi." We hugged. Light, measured, not cold, but cautious. As I sat, Dad gave a brief nod. Ethan smiled. Brittany didn't say anything at first. That was fine. The conversation stayed on safe topics. Ethan's transfer, Dad's latest retirement project, a book Mom couldn't finish. No probing, no backhanded compliments. Just silence where judgment used to live. Dinner arrived. Wine was poured. I relaxed, not because they made me feel welcome, but because I no longer needed them to. Halfway through the meal, Brittany looked up. "So," she said with her usual grin. Still doing that mysterious top secret thing? There it was. I met her eyes calmly. No, I'm doing the boundaries and inner peace thing these days. She blinked, then forced a smile. Cute. But this time, no one laughed with her. Mom caught my gaze, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. She just nodded, quiet and serious. After dinner, we ordered dessert. I didn't expect that. We'd always skipped it when I was around, like joy was too extravagant with me at the table. We shared cake and silence, and maybe something that resembled effort. As we left, Dad helped Mom into her coat, then paused beside me. "Glad you came," he said. "Me too," I replied. My voice didn't shake. I walked to the door without looking back. Not out of spite, but because I no longer needed backward glances to feel anchored. Outside, the air was cold, crisp. I zipped up my jacket and stood still for a moment. I had returned, not as the forgotten daughter, not as the soldier, but as someone who finally knew her worth and didn't need it confirmed to keep walking. No performance, no approval, no pain, just peace. And that was everything. I used to think healing meant resolution, that one day the people who hurt me would say the right words, that they'd look at me and finally see who I really was, that something in their faces, some flicker of regret, of recognition, would unlock everything that had been stuck inside me. I was wrong. Healing didn't arrive in a dramatic confrontation. It didn't wait for an apology. It didn't come wrapped in family dinners or tied to someone else's realization. It came quietly, like early morning light spilling across a kitchen I now called mine. It came in the way I didn't flinch when the phone rang, in the way I stood still in a mirror and didn't brace for judgment, in how I laughed with people who had never once tried to shrink me, silence me, or shape me into something smaller. I stopped chasing closure, because some people won't ever say they're sorry. Some stories never get a satisfying third act. And some families only learn to love you once you no longer need their permission. And that's okay, because I changed, not into someone better, not into someone perfect, but into someone true. Someone who could sit in silence without filling it with doubt. Someone who could walk away without guilt gnawing her insides. Someone who didn't need to win the room to feel valid. I still see them sometimes, the ones who never knew how to love me properly. We exchange updates, weather, headlines, memories softened by distance. But I don't step back into old roles. I don't perform anymore. I speak when I have something to say. I rest when I'm tired. I walk away when I feel myself disappearing. Not because I'm angry, because I'm finally at peace. My life is no longer a performance review. I don't need to be the impressive daughter, or the invisible one, or the forgivable one. I am simply myself, built from the quiet, from the fight, from the choice to keep showing up for myself, even when no one else did. Now my days are not dictated by what they think of me. I choose who gets access to me. I choose how much space I take up. I choose softness when it's safe and steel when it's not. And when doubt whispers, I answer back, clear and calm. You've made it this far. You're still here. And that is a miracle. Every time I look in the mirror now, I say it softly. You made it. Not because they changed, but because I did. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm standing in the ruins of who I could have been. I'm standing in the truth of who I am. And that, finally, fully, is enough. Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace, only to realize silence cost you your voice? If this story spoke to something buried deep inside you, don't just scroll away. Leave a comment below. When did you stop needing their approval to feel enough? Your words might be the light someone else needs today. And if this story made you feel seen, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone still fighting to be heard. Because healing begins when we stop hiding.